The chill on the bridge of the Starlight Wanderer wasn't from a failing environmental system. It was the cold of absolute despair, seeping into every circuit, every thought. Captain Eva Rostova slumped against the console, her fingers numb on the unresponsive controls. No physical blasts had struck her vessel. Instead, a pervasive, crushing wave of despondency had washed over her. Ghostly projections flickered before her eyes. The face of a loved one lost too soon, the memory of her greatest professional failure, the overwhelming weight of every burden she'd ever carried. Her comms were filled with static now, but before that, they had been filled with echoes of other species, voices she knew from neutral diplomatic channels. The Valyari, typically stoic and emotionally controlled, their last broadcast a collective, heart-wrenching wail of pure sadness. The Vogons, beings of unassailable logic, their final transmission a chillingly rational acceptance of oblivion, a surrender to the inevitable futility. They had all succumbed to the Sorrow Eater. In the void beyond her viewscreen, a vast, shadowy, incorporeal entity loomed. Not a ship but a swirling vortex of deep, unfathomable gloom. Its presence alone radiated absolute despondency, like a black hole for hope. What was this thing? What had it done to them? And what was it doing to her? It had appeared from the galactic south, a cosmic shadow. The entities of the Lumina, beacons of harmony, had detected it first, sending out a frantic, panicked warning before their light dimmed, their collective consciousness seemingly dissolving into a profound melancholy. They had named it the Sorrow Eater. It was an ancient, sentient cosmic entity that fed on negative emotions, especially despair. It didn't engage in physical combat. Instead, it would choose a civilization, subtly amplify their existing fears, regrets, and anxieties, weaving them into an irresistible psychic current. It whispered doubts into their leaders, deepened the grief of their populaces, turned minor disagreements into soul-crushing betrayals. Slowly, inexorably, the despair would consume them until all life on a planet simply ceased to move. It left behind perfectly preserved worlds, their cities untouched, their environments pristine, but all life on them was reduced to inert, catatonic husks, their minds drained of all will, their spirits extinguished. It was invulnerable to physical weapons, because it attacked the will to live, not the body. The Valyari, a species that had long ago suppressed individual emotion for the sake of flawless societal calm, found their carefully controlled anxieties amplified until their collective discipline fractured. Their entire society simply froze in collective paralysis, their citizens sinking into a shared, unmoving trance of despair, unable to act, unable to hope. Their method of emotional control had become a conduit for their ultimate undoing. The Vogons, beings of absolute logic and statistical probability, tried to reason with it. They meticulously calculated every variable, every possible outcome. When the Sorrow Eater showed them the logical inevitability of their own decline, the absolute impossibility of overcoming their challenges, their rational despair became absolute. Their logical processing, unable to find a single spark of improbable hope, led them to a logical surrender to oblivion. Their minds, devoid of a logical belief, simply shut down. Each species in its core strength had offered the Sorrow Eater a pathway. Their emotional control, their logic, all became amplifiers for their own destruction. Humanity was next. General Aris Thorne, head of Earth's Unified Defense Council, stood in the war room, the holoprojector showing the shadowy form of the Sorrow Eater drawing closer to Sol. Its despair field was already touching Earth's outer systems, probes reporting crippling psychological effects. It feeds on the absence of hope, Thorne stated, his voice grim. It exploits the logical progression of fear into despair. Other species, even those with incredible emotional control or perfect logic, eventually reached a point where, logically, hope was unsustainable. And then it consumed them. He looked at the weary faces around the table. But humans are different. We generate despair, yes. We have fears, regrets, but we also have something else. Something illogical, something maddeningly persistent. He brought up a series of images on the holoscreen. A child laughing through tears after a fall. A scientist obsessively pursuing a theory despite decades of failure. A human telling a genuinely terrible joke at a funeral. A group huddled together in the ruins of a destroyed city, sharing a tiny, salvaged meal and somehow finding a smile. A person getting back on their feet after being knocked down, not because it was logical, but because they just would. Hope, Thorne said, his voice gaining a fierce edge. Irrational, illogical, stubborn, glorious hope. We believe in things that make no sense. We find joy in despair. We cling to life when all evidence points to giving up. We laugh when we should cry. We connect when we should isolate. This is our weapon. The plan was audacious, desperate, and utterly contrary to every logical military strategy. They wouldn't fight. They would broadcast. Not aggression, but an overwhelming, irrational, persistent hope. Not facts, but pure, unadulterated human stubbornness to believe things would get better, even when they logically shouldn't. A deluge of human resilience, absurd optimism, defiant joy in the face of despair, the indomitable power of pointless, illogical connection. Back on the Starlight Wanderer, Eva felt the Sorrow Eater's presence intensify. Images of her deepest regrets flashed through her mind, amplifying her inner turmoil. The grief for her lost family, the crushing weight of command, the bitter taste of missed opportunities. Her will was almost gone, dissolving into the overwhelming wave of despair. Then, the counter-broadcast hit. It wasn't a coherent signal, but a cacophony of raw, illogical human optimism, blasting directly into the Sorrow Eater's psychic field. The sound of a child's unwavering belief in a fictional hero, despite knowing they weren't real. A foolish promise made in jest that was kept through impossible odds. The sheer, irrational joy of a terrible joke shared in a moment of crisis. The illogical decision to get up one more time after being knocked down, when every fiber of being screamed surrender. The shared comfort of a simple, illogical hug given with no practical benefit. The stubborn, unyielding hope for a better tomorrow despite all evidence pointing to oblivion. The defiant burst of laughter when tragedy struck. The Sorrow Eater screamed. Not a physical sound, but a mental shriek of agony that ripped through Kyan's mind. It thrived on the absence of hope, on the logical progression to despair. But this irrational, unyielding wellspring of hope was anathema to it. It could not consume what it fundamentally could not process. It could not feed on what actively defied its very nature. Its internal energy flickered, its vast, shadowy form convulsed. The Sorrow Eater, unable to integrate such a powerful, illogical surge of anti-despair, recoiled. Its shadowy form convulsed again. Then, with a final, silent spasm, it retreated into the void, leaving behind a profound emotional silence. It was not destroyed, but it was unable to feed. It had encountered a fundamental mismatch, a species that generated hope where logic dictated only despair. The crushing despair lifted from the Starlight Wanderer. Eva collapsed, exhausted but alive, her mind clearing of the phantom regrets. She looked at Earth, battered by the invisible war but vibrant, glowing with billions of tiny, illogical sparks of life. General Thorne's voice, hoarse but triumphant, echoed across the general comms. "It's gone." It pulled back. It couldn't process us. It classified us as unquantifiable optimism. Too much effort to consume, too much us. Eva let out a shaky laugh. Humanity had survived. Not because they lacked despair, but because they held onto a defiant, illogical, unyielding core of hope, even when all hope was lost. And in a universe where despair was a weapon, humanity's greatest strength was its stubborn, irrational refusal to give up.